We have to heal from the inside out. We, again, are miracles that we're alive. We are 30 trillion cells synergistically working together so that we can have life and experience life.
It's always like I was trying to find, like, I don't know, the magic bullet or whatever, like the one diet program or exercise program that's going to finally get me the physique that I wanted so that I wouldn't be so obsessive about it.
We go to biblical and scriptural times, and we have to realize that we are the temples in which we are under siege of today.
Ownership for me is 100% responsibility of all outcomes, along with being extremely intentional in decision making.
Hey everybody, welcome back to the Own It Show. I'm your host, Justin Roethlingshoefer, and if it is your first time here at the Own It Show, I want to welcome you because you have found a community that focuses on equipping, empowering, and ultimately educating you on how to take ownership of your health. And from where I'm sitting, I don't think there's something more important than taking care of our health, because if we can take care of our health, everything else can fall into alignment. Everything else can start to really be emphasized in a powerful way, and it exponentially grows. And so here, we bring on guests, we do solo episodes, really starting to make sure that we can do everything in our power to make sure that you feel like you can live differently and live differently in a powerful way. And so if today's message resonates with you, it's going to be a little different than what you've seen in the past. But if today's message resonates with you, I would love for you to share it with somebody that you love, share it with somebody that it will make an impact on their lives, or simply write a review, leave a review, or share it on social media. Any of these things are gifts back to me. Any of these things are gifts back to the people that are here, because quite frankly, if I go back and I look at where we were 1 year ago today, we were getting about 500 downloads a month. Today, we're getting about 2,500 downloads a month. And so that is not because of anything I've done. It's everything because of what you have done. You've been sharing this. You've been talking about it. And obviously, we continue to want to make sure that we can help people in their lives and be in their ears. And if we can start to make sure that the information you're getting is correct and it's empowering, you can ultimately be equipped to take the best action forward. And so today I'm super excited because this is really like a full circle moment. I think oftentimes when I'm giving protocols, I'm giving information, I'm talking about different things that people's journeys have been on, sometimes it's left open-ended, not knowing who these people are, not knowing what the journey really looked like, not knowing what they were actually struggling with because we haven't heard it right from their mouths. And so in 2025, you're going to be getting a lot more transformational stories in these podcasts. I talked about it last week on what's coming for 2025, and there's going to be a 5-minute interjection point, and really what it's called is the Own It Transformational Live Different story, and it's going to happen for 5 minutes every single podcast, right in the middle, and you're just going to hear from the thousands of clients who have come through Own It over the last 3 or 4 years, and it's going to be just a really cool way for you to start to see yourself in people and start to get hope that you are not broken. You're going to get hope that you can also be healed. You're going to get hope that you can also overcome whatever it is that you're experiencing, because you're going to see yourself in somebody else's story. And so that's the mission and purpose of this. And so today, I'm really excited to bring on a client that we've had for, gosh, Ryan, what is it, 3 years, 3+ years that we've been together?
Not quite, about 2 years though.
2 years. And so sometimes it seems like 3. Did we meet 3 years ago? Is that why what it was?
Yeah, we probably, closer to 2.5, 3 years is when we met, but I hadn't signed on right away.
And so when we wanted to really kind of look at this, Ryan is just an amazing human being. Ryan and I met at an event, like I said, 2.5, 3 years ago, up in the, was it Texas? Is that where we were? We met at an event in Texas, and it was, you know, when you meet somebody and you just like hit it off with them right away, you just have just like this heart tie that you feel like you've known them for years, even though you've literally just met. That was the experience with Ryan. And this man is a man of God. This is a man who serves people well. This is a man who looks after his family. This is a guy who wants to know everything there is about his body so that he can really start to move forward powerfully and continue to steward this gift that he's been given. And so so what I wanted to do today was really bring Ryan on and tell this story, because quite frankly, when you met Ryan, or when I met Ryan 3 years ago, you would have figured that this guy had everything sorted out. He had everything figured out. He had everything going on. His business was thriving. His family was thriving. He was thriving. He was fit. He looks like a 25-year-old man in a, like, how old are you, Ryan?
40.
40 years old. It looks like a 25-year-old guy that he should just go in just that type of fitness, that type of shape. And it was like, what possibly could he have why would he be so bought into what Own It's doing? Why would he be so bought in to wanting to come on as a client and literally hounding me? I still remember we were in when we were in Texas, it was like just hounding to get like, hey, can we get started? Can we get on a call? Can you give me more information? I was like, why can't everybody be like this? And so it was really amazing. And so I'm excited for you to come on, Ryan, and really just tell your story, really just help our audience understand you, who you are, and what this journey was like for you. Because to be honest with you, when we started to go on this journey, you actually didn't have your health in the way that it was depicted. It was a much more complicated situation and a much more mental, emotional, physical integration thing that goes back to a lot of what my story and my background's all about. And so, Ryan, it is such a pleasure to have you here, and I'm just so grateful that you agreed to come on and agreed to share your story. And I'm excited for everything we're going to do in 2025 together.
Yeah, absolutely. I appreciate everything you shared, Justin, and you know, it's interesting. I don't feel like necessarily that that my story is all that amazing or interesting, but at the same time, I'm happy to share it. And it's been a long journey for me. I won't go back too far in time, but I think it really all started for me back in my first year of college. So this would have been back in 2003-ish timeframe. And up until that point, health and fitness wasn't really a thing for me. Like I wasn't working out consistently. I wasn't really paying attention to what I was eating. I'm not sure if I gained the official freshman 15, but I was probably close. You know, because Bruce Hall dorm, like it was just cafeteria style and you could get as much as you wanted. Didn't think about the fact that, you know, maybe I don't need 2 pizza pockets or, you know, build a salad, but then literally it's swimming in ranch dressing. Like these weren't things I was thinking about. And I went home on a break and just happened to, you know, my dad had a gym membership and was like, yeah, I'll go get a workout in. And I met up with a couple of guys from high school that I hadn't seen, you know, about a year. And it just so happened that one of them was a personal trainer or had become one. And we just started having conversations and they kind of, I don't know, it was like a switch flipped in my brain where I started to at least care about working out and eating right. And so that would probably be when I would say my journey began. But from that point, it was definitely kind of a meandering journey of like, not really, I wasn't working with anybody besides our conversations. I wasn't working with a trainer. I wasn't, you know, following any kind of particular diet, but I did start to see some results and, you know, started to get in better shape. And that was a good thing. And then I would say because I've got a very type A personality, and right around the time, fast forwarding probably another, this is more like 2008 timeframe, 2007, 2008 is kind of when I started going down a more, destructive is too strong of a word, but my relationship with food and exercise began to be a little bit warped. And I started to just go too far as far as like hypervigilance and, you know, feeling like I had to be perfect in the way that I did it. And I started trying several different things. Some people may remember it, but I think my first foray into like trying a specific diet plan was the ABS diet put out by Men's Health. And that, I think, as much as it did help me, I did see results. By the end of the program, I had at least more visible abs than I did when I started. So, you know, technically it worked. But what happened for me is I think it kind of broke my relationship with food and fitness.
Interesting.
In that I became so obsessive about everything that I was putting in my body, and not in a good way. Like you can be obsessive in the sense of like, oh yeah, I'm going to be, eating really clean, all those things. And those are good. But for me, it had gone too far.
What were some examples of that? What would you do when things were put in front of you? How many things did you start to restrict? How many things did you start labeling as bad and good? What were the feelings and emotions that you started to experience when you started to go into these situations?
Yeah. So that was the beginning of my tendency to moralize food and look at food as being good or bad, or if I eat that food, I am good or bad for eating that food, and assigning a moral value to literally just to food. And it would oftentimes, the way it would most manifest was in two ways. One, if it wasn't on the plan, like if I was in a situation where I couldn't control the food I was eating, like I probably just wouldn't eat. Like I would just not eat. And then the other way is weighing and measuring everything down to the gram. And at the time, I've come a long way now, but at the time, actually thinking that what that scale said was completely accurate. And so like, okay, well, if the scale says this, and therefore I have X amount of calories, that's exactly what I consumed. And I needed those numbers to line up to the point that it would take me 45 minutes to an hour just to pack my food for the next day, because I was weighing everything. I wanted it to be perfect. And it actually, my wife and I, we've been married now for, goodness, going on 17 years. And around food and weighing and measuring was still to this day probably one of the bigger fights that we've had. Wow. And she said something to me, and again, it was definitely impactful. It took a while for it to really take shape, but one point during that conversation or argument, whatever you want to call it, she said to me, because we didn't have kids at the time, she said, "What are you going to do when we have kids and you're missing an hour of time with your kids because you're worried about what the food scale says?" And I was like, "Oh, that kind of punched me in the gut." And again, it didn't really fix it right away, but it at least started me thinking about that. And so, yeah, just this anxiety around what the food scale says, what are my macros, how much protein, carbs, fats, what are my total calories that I'm getting? Is it too much? Is it not enough? The abs diet, and for folks, this can work. I'm not saying this is necessarily inherently bad, but their model was like 6 meals a day, 3 meals, 3 snacks. And like, so there were a lot of things that I had to plan out for the next day when I was packing food. Like I got to do 2 snacks and a lunch. And then I got, so there are so many things. And I started to become hyper focused on it. And then the other way that it kind of broke my relationship with food is, it advocated a cheat meal approach, cheat meal, cheat day. During the program, it was more cheat meal. Once you've graduated, you go to cheat day. But for me, what it built into me is this all or nothing mentality around food, where it's like I would eat really clean for, all meals but one, or 6 out of the 7 days. But then on my cheat meal or cheat day, like all bets were off. Can I have an entire pizza? Let's get a tub of ice cream. And it really it was binge eating. Like, I don't like to say it because it's like, really? Did I really fall into that? But it was like, I would literally eat to the point where my body was like, Ryan, like seriously, if you take another bite, this might all be coming back up. Like that's what I would eat to. Not necessarily every single time, but more times than I care to admit. And that perpetuated, honestly, that mentality, or at least the kind of that cheat day approach, really carried all the way through from, this is now back, 2007, 2008, until I did the owner program. Like the owner program is what helped me break that specific piece. So that was the start of it. And then I kind of, like I said, I went through a lot of different things. I did the abs diet, and then I did I got into paleo and then into primal, which is very similar. And then I even ended up in carnivore for about, this is more recently, until up until Own It, I was doing carnivore animal based, where I did carnivore for probably 2 years, where it was like just meat, basically and meat and dairy for 2 years. And then, I went to what, at least, what's been called animal based, where I added in fruit, and honey. So I at least added back in some kind of carbohydrates. And that was all right up until Own It. Honestly, I was eating animal based when I joined the Own It program. And so just trying a bunch of things, and kind of the journey for me was, it was always like I was trying to find, like, I don't know, the magic bullet or whatever, like the one diet program or exercise program that's going to finally get me the physique that I wanted, so that I wouldn't be so obsessive about it anymore, and I could just kind of be a normal person. I didn't feel like a normal person. Like, and it's not that being normal is bad. I mean, being normal is necessarily what we're going for, but I felt like I was the only person that I knew that cared about it this much. And it didn't necessarily feel like a healthy caring about it. I was like, this doesn't sit right.
It was all consuming.
It was all consuming. That's a great phrase for it. So, and that had been my journey really until Own It. And again, still having the bad mentality around food, still moralizing food up until Own It, still having these cheat days that were just like stupid. I got a little bit better in more recent years, where I wasn't necessarily eating till I was almost sick, but it was still just way more than I needed. But it was like, oh, this is my one day that I'm going to get. And so I would just go like all or nothing, basically. And I wasn't doing it once a week anymore. It was more like once a month or so, but it was still this terrible mentality around food. So my journey has been meandering before Own It, and never really feeling like I knew what I needed to do. On the exercise front, it was like, I knew I needed to be working out, so I was, but it was literally for probably the last 3 years or so before Own It, like, I just had an Apple Fitness Plus membership, and I was like, all right, well, I'll just do one of those workouts today. And there was no rhyme or reason to it. It was like, I was always doing full body. I'd throw an upper or lower in there every now and then. Oh, sure, I'll do a HIIT session today. Like, but there was no program. It was just like, what do I feel like doing today? And it was good I was doing something. It's not like I wasn't working in any capacity, but it just felt like, I don't know. I just got to make sure I'm working out. That's all I know. I'll just do this.
I get it. And Ryan, I appreciate you sharing that, because I think oftentimes, especially for men, acknowledging that and even admitting that is very difficult. And because there's an ego play to it, there's a feeling of shame that comes along with that, sometimes a feeling of weakness or just inadequacy. And I can resonate with you very heavily on that, because a lot of the feelings that you were speaking about, the all-encompassing, the obsessiveness, the desire to control every single thing that was happening, a lot of people know that was my journey from really 13 through 17, obsessively, in a sense of like where I was severely anorexic. But that mentality even carried over probably till I was 28, 29 years old, and was able to really break that trauma bond and really get rid of those chains that I had been carrying for so long, and shift that mentality of fear around food. And so I appreciate what you're sharing, because I still vividly remember when I was probably 15, I had chosen, if it wasn't something that I prepared, if it wasn't something that I knew what every single ingredient was in there, that I would choose not to eat it. And I still remember being starving. Like, I was so hungry. I was ravenous. I had headaches all the time. Just didn't feel strong. And I came up from the basement. I was at my parents' house. I came up from the basement, and they had made a stir fry, and my parents were amazing. They always cooked the chicken separately, cooked the ground beef separately. They usually walked the vegetables separately. They would put some with sauce on for them and leave some off that didn't have the sauce for me. And then they did rice, but they added the rice into the vegetables on this particular day, and I lose it. I start crying. I start getting mad. I'm like, I'm not eating this. You guys know you're not supposed to do that. And it was literally in my mind at that moment. It was almost like an out of body experience, because I was like, what are you doing? Like, literally, what is happening right now, where you're going to go and sit and eat a great meal and you're fearful. You're fearful of vegetables, rice, and meat. Like, what is going on? And as you speak about this concept of binge eating, I can relate so heavily with that, because I would push and push and push, and I would literally calculate in my mind, okay, I had 2 scoops of ice cream, and those 2 scoops of ice cream, or a day that I didn't work out and I binged more than I should have, the next day, you're getting crushed on the treadmill, bud. You're going to burn all of these off, and you're going to run for days or ride a bike for days. And it was just a mentality that the world had put in my mind. Did you ever feel that the information that was continually put out to you through magazines, through articles, through social media, through podcasts and influencers, that mentality is really what continued to fuel that for you?
Oh, absolutely. I mean, I still see it today, and thank goodness now I've broken free of that. But you for sure, I had the same mentality of like, you have to punish yourself in the gym the next day for the food that you had the day before, and work that food off or whatever. And yeah, if you think 2 scoops of ice cream is binging for you, I mean, it was, like I said, it was a lot more for me. But yeah, it was definitely perpetuated in the media and Men's Health magazine. And of course, even just Men's Health magazine in general, like literally every single cover of Men's Health magazine has some athlete or whoever on the front. They've got like, chiseled 6-pack, all these things. I know now it's like, dehydration is a thing, and that they work. Yeah, exactly. They work up to that. But it was always like created in me this idea, like, well, that's obviously what I need to attain and want to attain, but like, I don't know how to do it. And I've come to the knowledge now, obviously, that if it's even real, it most, I've although I still, it's something that I want. It's like coming to a realization of like, what you see in a magazine or what have you is not a realistic portrayal of even what someone who is healthy and fit is. Yeah. But our society, for whatever reason, with men especially, has just, the 6-pack is like the thing that is like, oh, if you've got a 6-pack, therefore you are in great shape and you're healthy and you're like the epitome of masculinity. You've got a 6-pack. And it's just like, and I've come to a point now where I don't believe that anymore, thank goodness. But yeah, for many, many years, and it was just perpetually just, shoved into my eyeballs of like, oh yeah, that's what it's got to be. And again, it just kept me in this cycle of shame, guilt around food and what I would eat. And I still struggle with that to this day. It's so much better now, but there's still like, I still have a propensity to feel guilty sometimes about, certain foods that I might eat, or the quantity of foods that I might eat at different times. And again, it's gotten so much better, but it's still there. It's still something I struggle with even to this day of feeling guilty about food choices that I make sometimes. And like this sense of failure or inadequacy because I ate too much of this, or maybe it was too much of that, or, probably shouldn't have done that. So yeah, it's a continual struggle for me. It's again, leaps and bounds, light years. I mean, just ask my wife, light years better than what it used to be. And that is very much the Own It program. Like I'm much more enjoyable to go on dates with now when my wife and I go on date night. Because I'll actually eat the food.
Well, I think too, like even as you were a year and a half into your program, your wife came on board and started to actually educate and empower her in her own journey, in her own way. And with her going on her own journey, was that healing for even both of you in a certain sense, where as her education has risen, as her empowerment and being equipped to understand in her own way, being able to then also heal your mindset and thought process and relationship with food and exercise and just what health actually looks like? Was that healing even in how you guys operate as a household?
I think so. I mean, she's still relatively new on her journey, but I think if nothing else, what it's really helped with is for our entire marriage. It was like I was the health and fitness guy, and she just wasn't. And she's always been one of those
identity or stigma that was put on you.
Yeah, there was that, and just she never really least from the outside looking in, like never really had to. You know, she comes from a family of people with just like genetically crazy fast metabolisms. I don't know, but like her entire side of the family is like, they're all bean poles. Like, but at our family gatherings, like there is no height restriction on plates, but even so, they, you know, they're skinny. Now, obviously, yes, skinny is not necessarily healthy, but you know, she was always been one where she could eat whatever she wanted to and like wouldn't put on weight. Like she's weighed, you know, around 100 pounds literally the entire time that I've known her. And I would say most women outside looking in be like, I wish I could weigh that, you know, but she wasn't. It was still something that like I was doing the health thing, and she was always very gracious. I bless her for how many times she had to change the way that she cooked for how I was eating now. What diet is Ryan on today? But you know, she's been very wonderful and gracious in kind of accommodating me.
Yeah.
But what's been great since I went on this journey, and now that she's joined me, is she still obviously you know, will like kind of like your example, like actually a good example today. She's making chicken and dumplings, which I'm not going to eat the dumplings. I generally, for me, I avoid breads and glutens. So, you know, for that, the example what she'll do is like, you know, the stuff that she mixes into the dumplings, she'll set some of that aside. It's like rotisserie chicken and stuff, and I'll just have that. So there's still those things that we modify a little bit because she doesn't have an issue with gluten necessarily, so she eats bread a lot more than I do. So there are still some of those small modifications, but there's more of a unity, if you will, around the food that we're eating and our fitness journey, just because she's exercising now. I'm eating a lot more things. Like I wasn't really eating rice at all before. Now I definitely will eat, and I'm including rice to some extent. And it's like, oh great. She's like, she can make dishes that have rice in it again. Cause for years it's like, we just don't do rice. That's just not a thing that we do. So yeah, there's definitely more of a unity. And I think, healing a lot of the, in hindsight, unnecessary stress that I put on a relationship just because of how I felt about food and health and fitness.
That's really good. Talk about coming in and really just being able to like what you experienced from the newfound understanding of the data and the testing that was done, and being able to work so closely with Amanda, and being able to be so integrated with your medical team, and then your health coaching team, and really being able to work through a lot of this, both mentally, emotionally, as well as spiritually and physically, like being able to tie everything together. Talk through where you were and what you thought was healthy, the awareness that you gained from, oh my gosh, the data and what it pointed to, and then where you've ultimately come. Yeah.
Oh gosh, there's so much. I mean, really the biggest thing for me is, again, I felt like I had been into health and fitness for a while, but like when I first heard you speak, I literally had never heard of HRV. Like it was never a thing that had even crossed my plate, or I don't know how to put it, but like I literally never heard of it. I'm like, how have I never heard of this metric? And I wasn't really tracking anything. I had an Apple Watch, but I wasn't really tracking much. And so coming into the program, first off, like seeing where my HRV was, starting to track that, tracking my sleep a lot more, seeing how things affected me was very eye-opening, in ways that these things that I wouldn't have even thought about before. I started to become more aware of, understanding genetically kind of what kind of foods might have a predisposition towards needing to avoid, like gluten as an example. Did the genetic testing, although I'm not a celiac in any capacity, found out that at least genetically I have a propensity towards that. And so gluten's not the best for me. Before it was always like, oh, I just heard gluten was bad, so like I'm not going to eat that. Yep. But now like knowing, okay, for me, it actually isn't an ideal thing to consume on a regular basis, but that's a much different mindset than like, oh, the powers that be tell me that gluten is bad, so I'm not going to eat it.
Yeah.
So having that in-depth understanding that, like, I remember one of the results that I got was like, I have a higher tolerance for pain apparently, which I'm happy about in a certain sense. Like it feels like, yeah, I have a high pain tolerance, but that also means I got to be careful because I can injure myself because I'll push through the pain. I'll be like, oh, that hurts. I'll be fine. I'll keep going, and there actually been times in my workout since then where like something just didn't feel right in a muscle when I was doing a workout. And previously I'd been like, I'll finish out the set or whatever. But I'm like, no, I'll stop because I understand now that because I have a higher tolerance for pain, maybe than the average person, that means I might push through and actually hurt myself. So that awareness that came in from that, and starting to track these things, like I've gotten to a point now where I was never a big drinker. I was kind of a once a week scotch kind of guy, but like, I'm not even really doing that anymore because I saw in the data, like how just wrecked I was the next day, when I drank. Like I didn't necessarily feel terrible. I didn't have hangovers or anything. I wasn't like binge drinking, but like, much higher resting heart rate, sleep wasn't nearly as good. HRV was in the tank. And it's like, wow, I didn't realize that alcohol would have that kind of effect on my body internally. Like the kind of stress I was my body under. I got to a point where I was like, I don't like alcohol that much. Like not enough for me to feel like that's worth it. Now I'll still have things like on special occasions, things like that, but it's much, much, much fewer and farther between. But the big difference now is it's a much more intentional choice now. It's like, all right, I know that my numbers are going to be in the tank tomorrow. I'll do what I can to mitigate it as much as I can, but it's just, things are not going to look great in the morning. And that's okay. I'm now making an intentional choice versus like, oh, I'm just going to drink because I feel like it. And even my binge eating episodes that I would have, I didn't realize, how much that would affect me internally. Same thing, like resting heart rate's through the roof overnight. Like I didn't think you get a 0% recovery, but I've gotten a 0% recovery on Whoop before I kind of shifted my mindset around this. And so now again, it's like, all right, how do I mitigate this? If I'm going to have a meal that's going to be larger, how do I adjust the way I approach it? One big thing for me that I have found that because I'll still occasionally, like we have some family gatherings every year that we're talking like once a year things where I'll definitely have a larger amount of food, not nearly what it was, but definitely a larger amount. But I just found like, all right, well, if I still stick to one of the paradigms that I learned through ONA, the 3-2-1 rule, where it's like, don't eat 3 hours before bed, even just that makes a huge difference the next morning as far as how it affected my body overnight.
Yep.
By giving myself at least a little bit of time, make sure I have that time to digest the food, things like that. Whereas previously, like I would literally, it's like 9:30, 10 o'clock at night, and I finally get to that last bit. I'm like, all right, I'm done. And then I go to bed like 10 minutes later. And I was like, well, of course, I now know, of course, things are going to look terrible the next day. You're not going to sleep well. So just that, the empowerment that I received in understanding how these different choices affected my body and therefore being able to make informed and intentional choices about what I'm consuming, the exercise that I'm doing, what have you. That to me was the most eye-opening and empowering part of coming on with Own It. Was I just never had that kind of understanding of how those choices affected my body. Yeah. So I couldn't make intentional decisions around those things. It also helped remove some of the guilt and the shame that came with it for me, because again, it was because I had a better understanding of what different foods or what have you might cause. It giving me that ownership of it, it helped me to let go of some of that guilt that would come with it, because like, look, I know what the result's going to be, and I'm choosing in this scenario that what's going to be maybe more impactful for me emotionally or relationally is to participate in this event or have this food or, have a glass of wine for a special occasion or whatever. I'm choosing to say, the benefit that I'll get from that is worth it to me to have some of the negative effects in some of the health metrics in the morning. But the ability to make that choice, because I understood the ramifications of those choices, was what the big unlock for me was in kind of coming on and learning and growing through the Own It program.
That's so good. And I think you've said this multiple times, and I want to really tap this in for people, is it's the concept of inner health versus external health. And when we heal, we have to heal from the inside out. We, again, are miracles that we're alive. We are 30 trillion cells synergistically working together so that we can have life and experience life. And we've been built and created to thrive, but we have to be thriving internally at the cellular level before we can actually thrive externally from a longevity standpoint. And a lot of people have the six-pack abs. A lot of people have the aesthetic that you're maybe wanting or looking for, but yet internally are bankrupt. And those are the people that you see who develop chronic illnesses at 40, 50, 60 years old. They're the people who die of heart attacks at 30, 40, 50, 60 years old. They're people who all of a sudden have diabetes early onset. They've all of these things that their body has been bankrupt for the majority of their life in the pursuit of a certain look on the outside. And when you actually come back to this, and I want to touch on this, is when you actually heal from the inside out, you end up as a consequence, the way we're created. Like God was thinking when he built us. He was in a flow state, bro. I can guarantee you that. Like when he put this all to pen to paper. When we internally are healthy, when we are operating the way that we should, the desires of our heart to look a certain way happen as a consequence. Like when we're eating well, when we feel aligned spiritually, when emotionally we are all locked in, when we're training well, when we're sleeping well, when our stress is under management, when we're doing these things and we have data to actually validate the direction we're going, the outcome is exactly what we desire. And I still remember you came down. There's two stories I want you to tell. You came down for a kind of like a VIP health day with me. And we did your VO2 max testing. We did a lot of, we did your DEXA scan, looking at body composition, lean mass, fat mass, as well as bone density. We did your metabolic testing. We went over some of your blood work. And we just spent the day going over a lot of these things. And you sent me a picture at the end. And bro, this guy, like, guys, I'm probably going to have this picture as like the thumbnail of this, because this guy is cut up. When you're talking about like wanting a six-pack abs and at 40 years old being fitter than he's ever been, like we're talking about a VO2 max of 68.
I think it was 63, but still.
We're talking about a 63 VO2 max. So like, again, when we're talking about elite athletes, we're talking like 60 plus. So extremely fit. We're eating whatever it is that we want. He feels good. He feels strong. He's sleeping deeper than he ever has before. His blood work, again, is showing all cellular deficiencies that are less than 5 total. Being able to just have HRV scores that are record-setting, sleep quality that's record-setting. We're going to talk about that in a second. But just being able to see this transformation that you've made was so great and so powerful. And I think it really peaked at that VIP day that we got to spend together. What was that VIP day like for you in kind of bringing this to like, oh my gosh, this is incredible?
Yeah. The VIP day was indeed incredible. And I think for me, what I walked away from with that was just up until that point, I would say, like, yeah, I mean, some of the numbers I was already starting to see, like, you know, where my HRV scores were, looking at my sleep quality in general. And definitely I knew I was trending in the right direction. But I had never done really any kind of VO2 max testing. I had never done a DEXA scan. Like, what is, and like a really accurate body composition type of a scan. And so for me, it was an external validation that I would say I didn't know that I needed to, like, oh, like, okay, so this is working. Because again, I don't know what it was for. I'd never done a VO2 max test, but I can guarantee you it wouldn't have come in the 60s. Like, that wouldn't have been a thing. And so to be able to come in and get a VO2 max score like that, because of the training that I've been doing with it, Amanda's been helping me with training in ways that I, was just not doing before, and being able to see just concrete results of that. And then on the DEXA scan side, being able to see my actual body composition, what my lean muscle mass is, the low teens, visceral, just a body fat percentage that I have. I had not, I don't know if I should, but I will, sharing I had never thought about shaving off my chest hair and everything. And Justin encouraged me to do that. And I appreciate you doing that. And I did. And that, to me, that's the picture that I sent after I had done that. And I could actually now, I never realized exactly how much that was obscuring things. And I took that picture and even I was like, what? Yeah. Like I would never have expected to look like that. But the thing is, it's not that I'm not working hard, because I do. Like, I've gotten to a point now. I feel very fortunate in this, that I like the idea of not exercising or not eating right to me is like, that's just not who I am anymore. Like, I'm going to do those things, which is a great place to be.
Shifted in a whole new instinct and identity. This is just what I do.
Exactly. So it's an identity thing for me now. At the same time, I never would have thought that it was going to be possible for me to get that way without working so much harder than I feel like I am. Like, I'm working hard, don't get me wrong, but like, it's still, compared to what I thought I would need to do to achieve that, it feels easy. I don't want to say that it is easy, because it's not, but I don't know if I'm saying that right. But yeah,
what I hear you saying, and I think I'll come, because I know exactly the thought that you're talking about, because I've felt the same thing. I felt the same shift, and we've seen it in hundreds of our other clients that have struggled with this same type of component. Is in order to achieve what it is that you're at now, there was so much obsession that would be needed. There was so much level of struggle. There was so much like 2-a-day workouts and constant mileage and limiting calories and counting what your macros were like religiously, versus actually finding a peace with how this goes. There's a joy to what you do. There's a fluidity. There's it actually fits into my lifestyle. Oh my gosh, this actually does not require an obsession, but it just requires a certain level of intentionality and focus that was not there before. And that bridge has been built. Is that kind of what you were trying to say?
Yeah, exactly. Yeah, that's a great way to put it. There's not a struggle that there used to be with it, and that level of.
Go ahead.
I was going to the level of obsession is no longer there as well.
Yep. I still remember. So when people work again in our ecosystem with their mental performance coach, their medical team, and their health coaching team, I host what I call laser coaching calls. And we do small groups. So they're usually small groups of 10 to 15. And I still remember, gosh, this is about a year ago. I was in Southern California. I still remember I was sitting next to a fire, and you were on the call, and you had asked a question. I don't remember quite what the question was, but I asked you, what made you ask that question? And you said something that went directly to your identity of obsession. And we dove into this for probably 25 minutes, and for me, that was like a transformational moment for you in that conversation that was had, because that was a critical unlocking moment. It was like all of a sudden something flipped in your mind and there was a floodgate of freedom, where before that you were still like battling between it being okay not to be obsessed about the macro counting and not being obsessed about what you were putting into your body. And all of a sudden, as you flip that switch, as you gained freedom, that your identity was not built on proteins, fats, and carbohydrates and calories, but rather ingredients in which you were choosing, and the control of choosing the quality ingredients, the control of being able to say, what I put into my body, it's a temple. I'm choosing to fuel this thing adequately so that I can go and be all that God's created me to be. Like, there was this flipping of the switch and this immediate healing power that happened. I still remember it. I could see it in your eyes. And even if you're watching this visually, like as I'm speaking right now, Ryan's nodding and I can just see it in his eyes. Like there was this moment that literally flipped. Do you remember that?
Absolutely. Yeah. I don't remember the question either, but I remember the feeling of vulnerability in the conversation. I definitely remember that.
Big time.
But just, you uncovered for me something I never thought of. It was really the big unlock in that, one of the big unlocks at least, was just realizing that my all or nothing mentality was working both directions, in the sense of like, around the food piece. Yes, I would eat a bunch of food, but also like just this fear and of like, when it comes to just exercise and what I need to be doing there, it's like this same all or nothing mentality was there. It's like, oh, I have to make sure I'm exercising every single day, and I can't miss a day. And if I don't, like, I'm going to wake up one day and be fat and like unhealthy, and just this same paradigm. I never realized until that conversation. I always just kind of associate it with my food, and like, in the sense of, having those binge eating days, or either I eat really, 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 really clean, and then I just eat like everything else every now and then. It's just like a huge amount of food, all those things. I always applied that mentality there, but had never occurred to me that I was applying really that same mentality across my entire life, but definitely also around my health, my fitness journey as well. And just realizing that doesn't have to be that way. That you don't have to be obsessive about all of those things and still be able to get the results that you want, and to do it in a way that feels healthy, as opposed to doing it a way that like is just struggle and, just not a positive mindset or experience for sure. So yeah, I remember that conversation as well. And it definitely did shift in a big way in me, just kind of the way that I viewed not only just my fitness and my health, but really my life. It applies to my business. It can apply to my relationships. I mean, I know now that I just have a propensity to all or nothing thinking that I have to be aware of, and how that can lead me to places that are unhealthy, whether it's physically, mentally, spiritually, emotionally, because I have just, decided, oh, this is the way that it has to be, or the way that it should be. And therefore, like, I'm just going to do this. And that kind of mentality, there are certain situations where that can serve you, but I would say more often than not, at least for me, it doesn't.
Yeah.
And that conversation kind of unlocked that for me, kind of in a more all encompassing way.
It's so good. And there's one thing that I want to touch on right before we kind of wrap this up here. And I think a lot of people will appreciate this, because sleep quality is something that everybody's striving for, something everybody looks for and desires. We know that oftentimes when sleep quality is missing, it's the first thing that starts to derail mental health. It's the first thing that starts to actually derail a lot of their physical health, because they're so heavily intertwined. And how long ago was your first sleep apnea study?
2020.
So in 2020, you got a sleep apnea study done. Tell us really quickly the results of that sleep study.
Yeah. So it came back. The only reason I got it, I was working with an ENT, and kind of, I think his protocol was like, yeah, we're going to do inflammation testing and sleep study and all these things. So I didn't have a reason to do a sleep study other than this ENT was like, do a sleep study. I'm like, all right, cool. So I did it, and I knew that I kind of snored. Like, that was all we'd ever talked about with my wife. It's like, yeah, Ryan, you snore. I tell you to roll over, and that's pretty much all it ever was. But I did the sleep study, and it came back that I had severe obstructive sleep apnea. Like, my score was like the scale they called AHI. I forget what AHI stands for, but I'm sure apnea is part of it. Came in at like 33.1, and anything above, I think, a 30 is considered severe. But it's like, I had none of the other markers of someone who should have sleep apnea. Like, I wasn't overweight. Those are usually some of the telltale signs you have, folks. But like, yeah, it came back 33.1. Apparently, I've got terrible sleep apnea. Wouldn't have known it before necessarily, but I that's what the score came back. And I was like, all right. So I got onto a CPAP machine back in 2020, and I've been using it, again, because of my personality. I was real good about using it every night, but yeah, so came back with severe sleep apnea for reasons I was like, oh, I wouldn't have thought that, but okay.
And so much so that like we're talking about diligence, like Ryan travels with it. Like he makes sure he has it everywhere. And so
Yeah.
when we were at the VIP day, we were doing his VO2 max testing, and I was like, there's some efficiencies that we can actually start to improve with sleep quality that will change the way we utilize oxygen and will actually start to empower you, because you've got the lung capacity, obviously, with the 63 VO2 max. It's the efficiency of breathing. So we started doing some breath work. We got mouth taping going on. We got a nasal strip going on. And what we started to notice, I said, Ryan, I want you to actually stop using the CPAP for a week. What happened over the course of that week to HRV and sleep quality?
Yeah. So before sleep, we'll start with sleep quality. So when I first got started to own it, I was probably in the 38% range ish. I had gotten up, I was probably averaging like most nights 40, 45. So not terrible. Every now and then it would pop into the 50s, but that was a few and far between thing. And stopped using my CPAP. And, within the first night and really since, I'm like 50 plus, 55. I've gotten 60% some nights. So sleep quality improved by a good 5 to 10% overnight. And then the bigger thing for me, though, that I was shocked by, and I still kind of am, is my HRV. So up until really most of my Own It time, my average HRV has been 60 to 65. I'd every now and then I pop into the 70s. Before this, like my very best HRV reading ever was 83, which those aren't bad numbers, but 83, but it was like this random thing. But average 60 to 65. I stopped using my CPAP and my HRV average jumped 10 points and has not gone back down. So I'm now averaging, you look at my Whoop data, like I'm up 13%, but my average over December was 75. I actually, over the last week, I hit a 93 HRV, which I'd never seen before. I'm really trying to get triple digits. I really want to get 100. I don't know if I'll get it, but I'm going to try. So yeah, and over the past week, my average HRV is 85.
It's so good.
And that's literally just the CPAP. That's the only thing I've changed.
Yeah.
That was it.
And this is where we come back to, guys, where I've said this so many times, is I love the health industry because you have the opportunity to change somebody's life. But with poor data, poor information, or poor application of information, we can actually hinder it. We can actually start to hold somebody back. We can actually start to hurt somebody. And I see this in the world so often, where we're seeking something, we're going after something, but we don't know the difference between information and wisdom. The difference between information and wisdom is that there's an application. We know how to use it for ourselves. There's an understanding. And unfortunately, due to that, a lot of us fall for things that are not truth-based. They fall for things that are not built for you, but off of someone's opinion, somebody's feelings, somebody's own agenda. And we fall for people in positions of authority that don't have your best interest in mind. We fall for influencers and health experts who have some other reason why they want you to do something. And you start to unpack some of this. If we can empower you, if we can equip you, if we can educate you on how to take ownership of your own health, you can ultimately have the same results as Ryan. You can get off CPAPs. You can have transformations in body composition. You can have eradications of chronic illnesses. You can have this newfound mental freedom when it comes to food and fitness and all of these things that seemingly have held you in a cage. We go to biblical and scriptural times, and we have to realize that we are the temples in which we are under siege of today. Way back when it was all about a building and all about land, and that's what the wars were over. Today, the war is at the temple, and the temple is our bodies. And we have to realize that the battleground that we're stepping into is choosing to actually empower and equip ourselves with the truth. That's the battleground that matters. That's the choices that you're actually being poised to take. That's what you're being called to do. And if you're willing to, you'll see transformation that you will have never experienced before. If you're willing to go on a journey, you will be able to see something and take ownership of it. So it's not something that you now have for a season. Everybody knows what it feels like to feel good for a season, a week, a month, a quarter, half a year, and then it dissipates. But I want you to have this transformation that lasts a lifetime, something that impacts you, your family, your kids' kids, because this is something that you now have learned. And when we can understand this thing that we live in so powerfully, that's what changes. That's what changes. I still remember reading the Bible and going back to like Peter and John and these people being thrown in prisons. And I was like, man, I'm not in a prison. Like, what do I have to kind of relate to this? Well, no, you might not be in a physical prison. You might not be behind bars, but you're in a prison in your mind. You're in a prison in your body. You're in a prison in the life that you're living because you've put yourself in a box, because the temple is under attack. The temple is under siege. And a lot of us are sitting behind metaphorical bars that hold us back from stepping into what we're actually called to. And until you're willing to take ownership of your health, that's where you're going to stay. And so this is where I want your next step. If what Ryan's talked about has really resonated with you, I want you to ultimately go to ownitcoaching.com and reach out to us. Like, just have a conversation. How can we help you best? How can we help serve you in a way that's going to help you get to this next level? Because we want to help you. Message me on Instagram. Let's have a conversation. Let's figure out what this is for you. I want to hear what you're struggling with. What is the thing that you won't tell anybody, that you've tried all of these other solutions but have left you in the same place? Because here's the thing, at the end of the day, what makes Own It different is we just love you more. We just love you more. It has nothing to do about us. It has everything to do about you. How can we help you get from where you are to where you desire to go so that you can ultimately step into what you're called to do? And so, Ryan, for somebody who has lived pre-ownership and now post-ownership, what would you say in a word or a phrase is your definition of ownership?
I knew you were going to ask me this question. I had a feeling, so I've been thinking about it. For me, it's going to be a phrase. I can't do it in one word, but it is ownership for me is 100% responsibility of all outcomes, along with being extremely intentional in decision making.
It's great.
Not very succinct, but that's what I got.
I love it, because at the end of the day, I always say we came from an intentional God. So how do you expect intentional results if you don't want to be intentional?
Yeah.
And intention plus consistency over the course of time creates inevitable results. Yep. And for everybody watching, everybody listening, that's the takeaway that I want you to have, no matter what you're feeling. If you're a type A type personality, a type B personality, if you're somebody who currently obsesses over things, or somebody who just doesn't really care about anything, if you're somebody who feels like they have their health on the outside but know something's wrong on the inside, if you're somebody who, hey, you know what? I think I've got my health on the inside and I've convinced myself I do, but yet on the outside, I don't look like I have any ordain of health. Those are all signs and symptoms that something else is going on. They're all signs and symptoms that the world has told you to justify and normalize, when it actually is a signal of dysfunction. And the longer that we live there, the longer you're going to live in that prison. The longer you stay there, the more you're going to feel trapped and held back. And so my prayer, my wish for you is that you would ultimately step in and say, hey, I want to take ownership this year. I want to start stepping into something new. I want to do something different. I want to live differently. But in order to live different, we have to make a different choice. In order to realize something different, we have to ultimately choose different. And that can start for you today, because you can make an intentional decision that will step you into ownership and be able to give you a life that's different. Success is different, so own your different. We'll see you guys next week.